Welcome back to Gutter Wisdom. Before we start engineering your pleasure, we gotta audit your discernment. I've invited my friend and colleague, Brittany Wittig, to sit in the gutter with me. She's someone I trust deeply and personally work with, and we're gonna dismantle the spiritual industrial complex. The hustlers, the cult leaders, the so-called healers who charge you a premium for your own vulnerability. This series is designed to be listened in order. In this episode, we're not talking about gullibility or stupidity. We're talking about hunger and what happens when meaning, authority, and unexamined power collide. This is where the cycle begins.
We are going to be talking about something today that feels so important and so juicy and so relevant. And I'm just so happy to dive into this.
Let's dive in. We are going to have
Yeah.
the most important conversation of the year,
Mm,
dare I say, on this podcast.
I feel that. I feel that. So I'm just going to start with this. I have noticed recently, very much over the last year, but especially in 2025, I have noticed many, many humans in my world, especially in my personal life, many humans who previously had zero interest in spirituality, zero interest in the non-physical realms or even the idea of them. I've noticed so many of those humans suddenly coming to me with interest in what I do for work, interest in the spiritual realms, interest in spirituality. And I would just love to hand this to you and hear what you have to say about that because your perspective on this is, I think, very interesting.
Yes. Thank you so much for one, having me back on the show. It is a real honor to be able to have this conversation, particularly with you, and particularly on this really edgy topic. I thought our last podcast conversation was going to be the edge for us, but no, here we go. So, the trend that you are noticing is extremely predictable. And I kind of hate to be a buzzkill because there's so many people right now that are like, this is such a revolutionary moment in time. And this is where the awakening of consciousness and yeah, yeah, I don't disagree. I've been hearing and feeling this from my own guides for a while that there is a ripeness of the moment, but and spirituality has increased in popularity in waves, in cyclical waves that are always coincidental with grief, loss, and collective trauma. And so, if any of your listeners have already watched my masterclass, Trauma, Kink, and Somatic Healing, you know what I mean when I say collective trauma. But that's something that we all go through. Every single one of us has gone through that. And so, let's just do a history recap because this is the kind of history that people don't teach us. And when you don't understand historical cycles, you're ripe for bamboozlement, which is what is happening right now, too. So let's have this whole conversation. My prayer is that you leave this conversation with a much more trained ear in the bullshit that has happened not only in the past, but is happening again right here, right now. So, history lesson. Spiritualism was quote unquote invented in the 1840s here in the United States. Now, we know from indigenous cultures that this practice has stood the test of time. Often we have records of origination in Northern Africa. But for the context of this conversation, I'm going to focus the history on the United States and the term spiritualism that gained popularity in the 1840s. In the 1840s, what was happening? Civil War. This was the collective trauma that was going on, and the rise of spiritualism in the mid 19th century was massive. And it really hit its peaks after the war had happened. There's a great book on Victoria Woodhull and the rise of spiritualism in that era. What you see during that time is exploitation. Exploitation. And this was like the first recorded, documented, pretty widespread understanding that in these moments of people at their most desperate, there are always going to be vultures that try to capitalize on that. So let's give some other context. When was spiritualism increasing in popularity? Again, in the early 1900s up until the 1920s, what was going on there? World War I and the Spanish flu. Hello, COVID.
Yes.
And then the third data point that I want to leave you with is the third wave, which we would call the New Age spiritual movement, happened and started in the 1970s and the 80s. What was happening then? The civil rights movement and the Vietnam War. And now we're having again a new wave of increased popularity and interest in spirituality here in this 2020s era because COVID and, dare I say, World War III. So this is not surprising to me. It is also not surprising that there are lots of people coming out of the woodwork as quote unquote teachers or gurus or whatever. And I've said to you, Brittany, that my sense is we have a lot of second graders out here trying to teach kindergarten, and they don't know what they don't know. So I wanted to give a little bit of context on a very popular, problematic spiritual organization that we all love to hate. And I teach this in the class that you were in and you sat in on. I share a video that has a lot of new age spiritual concepts that really like tug at your heartstrings. And you're like, yeah, that feels so true. It
Yeah.
feels so true. There's so much resonance here. And then at the end of that video, it says, Curious Scientology.
Yes, it's so effective because you're watching this and you're like, oh, you feel that exactly what you said. It's like you feel this resonance with it. It's like, ooh, that statement feels true. Ooh, that statement feels true. Yeah.
Yes. And Scientology has its roots in the 1950s, but really gained in popularity in the 70s and 80s, coincidental with the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. And at its peak, had like 100,000 members in it. And right now, you can watch the Scientology videos on YouTube. And I always tell the people that I mentor, you go and watch those videos and you tell me the exact new age spiritual movement jargon that you're subscribing to that has its roots, right? It's right there. It's right there in Scientology. So what I call this is I'm like the pearl that's wrapped in shit. The pearl that's wrapped in shit. And this is how they get you. At your most vulnerable, at your most confused, at your most desperate, which is happening with tremendous moments of grief and loss and collective trauma, they hand you a pearl. And that pearl impacts you so deeply, but that pearl is wrapped in fucking shit. And that's what you have to look out for. And what I'm really hoping that I can illuminate some things around in this conversation with you, Brittany.
Oh, yes. Oh my. So I just love the Scientology example. It is so powerful. And I do recommend that everyone listening, when you're done with this podcast, go to YouTube and watch some of these videos. It's going to make you uncomfortable in a good way because it's important to be aware, like Francesca said, where some of these concepts that we might be hanging on too tightly, where their roots are. So, Francesca, I would love to hear about the year that you spent researching cults before you chose to begin teaching, because I just love that. It feels in such deep integrity. Yeah, would love to hear about it.
Thank you. This is seldom a story that gets told on public audience, so I'm honored to be able to talk about kind of the why. The first time I taught a class, which was the trauma, kink, and somatic healing class, I was a last minute add to a schedule at a festival. I wasn't even on the app until the day before I was giving this class. So in my mind, I'm thinking nobody is going to come. If 10 people show up, I will be thrilled, right? That class, I had over 200 people sit at the feet of that teaching. And for 2 hours after I stopped the formal teaching, people just stayed to ask questions. And that's when I realized that what I was saying was resonating and that people are listening, which means I have a lot of responsibility to pick up now. And so I actually went to my high priestess and disclosed the fear that I was having around this because here's my philosophy. Here's my hot take. I don't think everybody wakes up in the morning who has a class or whatever and is like, I want to start a cult today.
Yeah.
I don't think they say that, right? I don't think that. But I'm
No.
like, but so many people get off track. How does that happen? And I just took a moment to say, if out the gate I had this kind of resonance, my content had this much resonance, then I better be in fucking integrity around it. Am I always going to be perfect? No, but I can train myself like a warrior to be able to hold the tip of accountability's blade at my own throat over and over and over and over again. And so I took a big pause in teaching after that first initial class. And I just started researching. And I read and I read and I watched and I watched. And all I was looking for, I wasn't trying to drag anybody. What I was actually trying to do was train myself so that when the darkness, when these things come up in me, I know it. I'm like, oh, I know what this is. Because I don't have any denial that the holistic nature of life exists in me, which includes all of its shadows, right? If I am all of creation, if we subscribe to that in the spiritual context, if we're all creation, that means every expression of bliss and joy and love lives inside of me, but it also means that every torture and harm and villain also live inside of me. And if I can get sober around that, then I can navigate it responsibly. And I often think when people go into these worlds, they're like, I would never do that. It's like, yeah, you would. You fucking would. And the fact that you deny that you have capability of being so harmful, getting so far from your root, actually makes you quite dangerous. And so one of the things that I realized is, oh, this is another moment where getting real close to my darkness makes me a safer person.
I just would love to say here that what you are expressing is this level of deep integrity that is so unique and has been so influential on my personal journey as a leader. And it's a big part of why we are having this conversation here on the podcast, because I am so grateful to you for sharing. I mean, just that piece that you shared right there, I think could be life changing for anyone who's thinking about leading or teaching.
I think this is really, well, one, thank you so much for making that reflection. I have adored being in these types of conversations with you offline in private. This is so congruent with like my philosophy around kink and my philosophy around my own personal sadism and making sure that these parts of me, one, get fully loved, and two, get expressed in a way that is an orientation towards the good of all in harm to none. And like I said, I know I ain't perfect. Certainly not. I'm always going to show up for repair when repair is necessary. I can also check myself pretty early on in that process so that harm doesn't get out of control. Because I really think that when people walk on a path of leadership, It's like there's the straight and narrow, and then there's a hairline fracture off. And you and I are both math and science nerds. We were both on robotics team, so
Yes. Yes.
I can talk nerdy about angles with you, right? But if you're just a couple of degrees off of a straight line, and then you go and you continue on a path, before you know it, you are so far removed from where you thought you were going to be, right?
Yeah.
From your pillar of coherency. And you don't recognize it because that little hairline fracture just didn't feel like anything at the beginning. And that was the important thing for me too, as I was doing this year of cult research. I wanted to understand what it looked, felt, sounded like when I started to get a hairline fracture off. I want to know what that feels like so that I can course correct real fucking fast.
Oh, I love that. And I love just that visual of the hairline fracture that then you can get so far off track. And while I, thank goodness, haven't had that experience in my leadership and teaching, I have 100%, as you said that, immediately examples of that in my personal life came to mind, where that hairline fracture, instead of noticing it, I followed it and it took me so far off course. Yeah, I appreciate that example very, very much. Okay, so could you share some of the signs that leaders, maybe signs we can look for in leaders early on that could indicate that they could be heading towards cult-like behavior or behavior that's very out of integrity?
Absolutely. The first one, which I actually see rampant right now in the coaching industry. So here's a funny anecdote is now that I have digital classes online, I get ads for the coaching industry on social media, and it is repulsive to me. And I'm like, yo, thank God I know not to listen to this nonsense. I see
Yes.
this first one all the time, particularly in the coaching industry. And I think it's a deep, unhealed mother wound. I'm going to say that first, and then we'll get into it and we'll loop back around. And then you can make your own decisions around that. That's my hot take. This is pride versus what my priestess lineage calls divine pride. So, pride in the leadership context is when someone takes credit for the experience that their client, the seeker, the human in front of them is having. Now, I often say when there's a beautiful experience that happens in my temple and someone reflects that with their either hard eyes or I see it, I feel it so palpably now. They're giving me that you did this for me. And I say, I know that was beautiful. I'm not sure I can take credit for any of it. I know that was beautiful. I'm not sure I can take credit for any of it. What happens when someone, doesn't matter how subtle, you take the credit for the beautiful experience, you're on a slippery slope of an out of control God complex. The difference is there is something that you can take credit for. There is something. And you're like, but. And I'm like, I know, baby girl. I know. Yes. What I say to the people that I mentor is you get to take credit for the fortification and the capacity that it requires in order to hold the divinity that is moving through you. But you are not divinity. Don't get it twisted. You're not divinity. You are just holding the divinity that is moving through you. And all of the heartache, all of it, your journey, which I'm sure had many initiations to it in order for you, any leader, in order to hold all of that, was intense. You get to take credit for showing up for your initiations from God. You get to take credit for
Yes.
the fortification and capacity it requires to hold that.
Mm,
But you don't get to take credit for the divinity that was moving through you. That's
yes.
God. That ain't you.
Yes. Oh, oh.
We're going to pause the investigation here for today. In the next episode, we're naming the red flags that don't look like danger because they've arrived dressed as belonging, purpose, and elevation. Before we go any further, I want you to check your own structural integrity. Go to priestessfrancesca.com and take the Engineering Hotness quiz. It'll tell you whether your internal alarm system is online or if it's been quietly overridden. I'll see you in the next part of the protocol. Until then, keep your mind in the gutter, y'all. You'd be surprised at what you find in the dark.